Welcome to Just Off the Highway. I'm Prodgers and I'm here in Braamfontein, in the heart of Johannesburg. A few hundred meters behind the camera is Park Station, and behind me over there in the distance is the Nelson Mandela Bridge. If you've ever visited Johannesburg CBD, you've probably been very close to exactly where I am now. I'm on a section of railway that's closed for refurbishment, so let me start by thanking PRASA for the permission to film here. A quick warning though, this is a story of a disaster that really happened, so if you're sensitive to details of destruction and considerable loss of life, this episode of Just Off the Highway is not for you. Your hand was hovering. You were about to skip and now you're going, oh, disaster, destruction. Let me listen further. Why not take this opportunity to like this video and hit subscribe? And if you feel that Just Off the Highway adds value for your day, please leave me a tip by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/lprodgers and help me bring these stories to a wider audience. Let's do what they did not do more than a century ago. Let's proceed with caution. Imagine it's the year 1896. It's been 10 years since the world's largest gold boom, and another boom is about to reverberate across this landscape. On the 16th of February 1896, a train loaded with an estimated 60 tons of dynamite that's supposed to be used on the mines rolls into the Braamfontein siding close to where I'm standing now and stops. The explosives are stored in a couple of covered carriages and several open trucks covered only by tarpaulins. It's Sunday, so there's nobody to offload the cargo. It sits. It's the height of the South African summer, and temperatures easily go over 30 degrees, and that's in the shade. And there is no shade. The next day, a small amount of that cargo is taken to Lippett's Dynamite Company, but the men who are supposed to sign for it are on a sort of early long lunch, although they do deny that later. So the explosives are taken back to the train and reloaded where it sits and sweats. Because of that small load that had to be returned, there's now an extra charge of £3 for time wasted. And for 2 more days, there's a leisurely argument over who's responsible for paying it. Nobody lifts a tarpaulin to check whether these extremely hot sauna conditions for 60 tons of explosives is actually such a good idea. The original railway siding was originally situated here in Braamfontein because it was quiet and away from the busy station. But as Johannesburg filled up with fortune hunters, thousands of the poorest people had to find somewhere to live. And there was open ground right next to the railway lines. Shacks start to cluster around. This whole area, an informal shanty town, grows up. Somebody calls it Vredendorp, peaceful town, but it won't be for much longer. The traffic manager of the station steps in to solve the stalemate about the £3 charge, and eventually on Wednesday after lunch the unloading begins. But meanwhile, this is still a busy working rail yard, continually shunting of trains nearby. Now, trains are not supposed to get onto the wrong track, and in those days when points were switched to change the track on which a train travelled, the points were locked manually with a lock and key. This is Johannesburg, and the locks kept getting stolen, so railway workers mostly stopped using them. And on that day, as one of the nearby shunting trains reaches a set of points, it suddenly swings onto the Braamfontein siding. There is a policeman on duty, and he waves his flag to alert the driver, but it's too late. The shunting train collides with the back of the dynamite train. The blast flattens every building within a radius of 1 kilometer. The informal settlements clustered around the railway line are vaporized. The shock wave was felt in Pretoria, where it rattles windows. The explosion was heard in Klerksdorp, 200 kilometers away. Chunks of the train end up at Crown Mines, which is 5 kilometers away. In every direction, buildings, animals, nobody knows how many people, just gone. The whole railway siding itself vanished. In its place was a hole, roughly 70 meters long, 20 meters wide, and 8 meters deep. More than half the size of a sports field. and it's 3 stories deep. People rushing to the scene said that the ground was mushy and their legs sank into the soil when they tried to walk on it. It's still one of the largest single non-nuclear explosions in history. A commission was set up to investigate, but the findings weren't definitive because key witnesses had simply disappeared. This is the old Braamfontein Cemetery. Inside the grounds is a monument to all those who lost their lives in this disaster. It gives the official death toll as 75. It's probably wildly inaccurate. From reports at the time, 20 coffins full of various unmatching, unidentified body parts were buried somewhere in the cemetery. And then there's also the fact that there was not the same care taken to accurately record the victims who were not white. Tragically, whole families were wiped out, and there was often nobody to report them or their neighbors' neighbors just missing. The death toll must have been much higher. A grim statistic is that those victims who were identified were disproportionately women and children, because many men were away working on the mines and therefore not caught in the blast. There were over 200 seriously injured people. Those hospitals that were still standing overflowed. Private people had to pay horse-drawn taxis to transport the wounded further out to get care. There were also some insanely fortunate escapes. The shunter who had been on the train that collided with the dynamite trucks was knocked to the ground by the explosion, and when he woke up he was only bruised. The policeman who tried to warn the engine driver by waving his flag, he was less than 100 meters from the blast, and he only suffered a small cut on his neck. There's so much more to the story. I've left out an enormous amount of detail because otherwise this episode would be an hour long. And so it's all the more strange that something of this magnitude is largely forgotten. Sure, historians know, but not the wider public. I've lived in Johannesburg half my life. I've never heard about it until recently I discovered 3 sentences written in an old travel guidebook. More South Africans know about historical events overseas. For some reason, we just don't bother to remember or tell our own stories. And I guess that's part of what I'm trying to do with Just Off the Highway. To look through the cloud of dust and debris thrown up by time and remind us that the people of this city have experienced earth-shattering events and come back bigger and stronger. Real people once walked here. I guess given where we are, some trace of them still does.